Today I'll talk about biases in recruitment. But last week I met with Rebecca and Richard, and we were talking about sort of how I wound up here, and they asked me to be here today and share my story, which I have never shared publicly, so it might be a little hard my first time in this way. So that's me as a kid, and as Richard mentioned, originally from India. And in 1985, my family immigrated from India to the US, to Boston, and I was 11 years old. And so specifically, when I say Boston, didn't actually grow up in Boston, but in a suburb of Boston called Methuen, which was about 45 kilometers from the city. So it's a suburb, and quite different than what you expect, not about 3 hours away from New York. But the interesting thing about Methuen, this small town, is that it's a small town of 40,000 people, and it's mostly white. So 95% white, a little bit Hispanic, and only a few hundred people that are African American or from Asia. And growing up in this place as an 11-year-old was the toughest thing. You know, here I am as a 11-year-old kid with a different skin color than everybody else, shorter than pretty much all the other boys, funny foreign accent. My mom used to put coconut oil in my hair, so I smelled of coconut. And I wore funny clothes, all of which were the perfect ingredients for being bullied, because I was different, and I was quite different than everybody else there. And so for a couple of years, those were the toughest years of my life, not just being insulted or called names, but also the physical abuse. I would get pushed, punched, hit. I got locked in lockers a couple times. And it was after those 2 years that, towards the end of those 2 years, being just a 12-year-old kid, I went through major depression, suffering from discrimination, and I really thought about committing suicide. But then that summer after 8th grade, I decided that I wasn't going to take it anymore. So I started taking up karate classes. I took up I joined the high school teams for soccer and tennis. I was a very shy kid, so I didn't really have friends, so I read this book, How to Make Friends and Influence People. And that started my journey of fighting back and determining my own future. And from there on, I think the most proud achievement of my life was probably then, where I decided to become friends with my bullies. And years later, at the end of college, I was one of the groomsmen for my main bully's wedding. But that was a long journey, and that's been like the rock for the rest of my life. Whenever I have adverse situations, I remember that I got through that, and that everything that's happened since doesn't compare for me as to what I went through at that time. And that experience, as you would imagine, gave me a lot of empathy for everyone who's marginalized, who's been discriminated against, be it for skin color, height, gender, sexual orientation, poverty, etc. And that also gave me a mission, and I knew that I wanted to do something about that in my life. Yep. Sorry. Fast forward, college, my family wasn't that well off, so I worked my ass off, working a job as well as college, and then got a good job at GE, and then started my first tech company at age 23, kind of young and stupid, didn't really know what I was doing. But luck was with me, and just worked hard and fought, and that company today is on the NASDAQ stock market, is worth about $1.3 billion. And I started a couple more companies, then moved to Silicon Valley, started investing in startups. And for me, these businesses were always a means to an end. And for me, the end was always very clear that I wanted to help others who needed help. And so after living in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, I really lacked meaning, and I finally got to a point where I'm like, I'm ready to embark on the main purpose of my life. I left the US in 2010, traveled around Asia for a year, interviewing people in poverty, trying to understand the problems firsthand, and then volunteered in Africa for a year and a half. And while working on projects for poverty alleviation in Africa, that's where I saw that the need for what I ended up doing now, EngageSpark. And I met my co-founder, also an American in Uganda, who was also volunteering. And we moved to the Philippines 5 years ago, to Cebu, to build this company, which is a social enterprise. And it's a little bit different in that we're a not-for-profit social enterprise, so we're still a business with revenues and profits, but our intent is to repurpose and reuse all profits to build more products that help alleviate poverty or give discounts to NGOs. So it's not for self-enrichment, but to help society. And through our work with EngageSpark, so far we've operated in over 125 countries and impacted the lives of over 800,000 people, doing all sorts of work: health, agriculture, sex ed, etc. But there's a topic that I think we often miss about that I wanted to talk about today. You know, equality, we often talk about equality, but equality isn't enough for justice. You know, we say we want to be treated equally, but the fact of the matter is that we all got a ticket in the lottery of birth. And we were all born with different advantages and different disadvantages. And so no two of us are equal. And I don't think we ever can be, because we were born differently. Someone's born short, tall, someone's born white or brown, or with a different sexual orientation, or different gender. And it's not enough, you know, in this picture, what it's about is 3 kids who can't afford a ticket to this baseball game. They're peering over the fence, and they all have the same height crate that they're standing on. And so you could say that they're all being treated equally, in a sense. They all have the same opportunity, you could say there. But the fact of the matter is they're all different. And therefore, they don't really have the same life. So for example, you know, if the tall kid is born in a wealthier family, the family could afford that kid tutors. Whereas the poorer kid doesn't get tutors and doesn't have the same advantages, even if they went to the same exact school and lived in the same exact town. The second thing we sometimes talk about is equity, you know, being treated equitably, where we have seen differences, and therefore we help certain groups. So to break the old boys network, women's groups form, or LGBT groups form to give each other a leg up. But that still doesn't quite fix everything. And that's something key that I've noticed that I'm working on, and I want to make a change in the world, is how the rest of society is. You know, so society is just full of systemic barriers. So it may be that we may have equal opportunities as somebody else or everybody else, but the way society treats us will always change our success in life or how we do things in life. And those are the real barriers that we have to tackle and eliminate. They shouldn't be a fence at all. We shouldn't have to give one group extra help over another group in the ideal world. But that's something we should do today. And it's only by removing systemic barriers in society will we get there. And so it's not about just us helping others who are marginalized or others similar to us, but how do we actually change society? That's where I feel a lot of the conversation is missing, because that's how we get to justice for all. Because we're all different, no two of us are equal. We all have our advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages or disadvantages are just more obvious than others, or as society, systemic barriers can often even be as simple as the ideal person. You know, if they could be tall, attractive, etc., and straight. And everybody keeps wanting to be that just like them. And that's a systemic barrier that prevents other people who are born differently that they'll never be able to get there. And that's a systemic barrier. No matter how much you help that person, they just can't overcome those things unless we change society itself. And that's my dream through the work that I'm doing, is to be able to change some of these things. Talking about diversity, we often talk a lot about gender, sexual identity, religion as disability, but I feel like we often miss one part of diversity and inclusion is poverty. There isn't enough conversation around poverty. Not to say that the others are not important, but we also should be talking about poverty, because from the lottery of birth, it's not a child's fault that they were born into poverty, but yet that will affect and impact the rest of their life quite often. Because we just have to accept that the world is full of bias. All of us have biases, no matter how hard we try. Some of us have less biases than others, or more biases, but we always have biases. That's part of being human. But the more awareness we have, and the more we think about those things, and the more we expose ourselves to people of different types, those biases decrease. One thing I've learned as I've interacted with other people who've gone through big challenges or adversity in life is that it often makes people stronger. Because if you can overcome a big challenge, that is built character. Yep. Oops. So here in the Philippines, specifically, one of the reasons why I moved to the Philippines after Africa was looking at the poverty rates here and the distribution of people in rural versus suburban areas. And people who are marginalized, or people who are discriminated against, they're much more marginalized in the province than they are in the cities. They have access to fewer opportunities. People are less likely to hire somebody who's gay or lesbian or transgender, or somebody who's darker. And that's one of the reasons that I like the BPO industry is the BPO industry is very inclusive. It's much more inclusive than most other industries here. I mean, the fact that all of you are here and many of you are from the BPO industry speaks to that fact. And there are fewer systemic barriers in this industry, but there are still some that remain. And a BPO job for somebody who's marginalized in the province can fundamentally change their life. And one of the things that we're doing at EngageSpark is helping companies reduce these systemic barriers through our products. And talking about talent acquisition team, because this is how inclusivity starts. A lot of times it's the HR department that's in charge of diversity and inclusiveness, but it's the talent acquisition team that holds the gates for who gets to come in. And that's where I feel like there's still a lot more work to be done. And that's a challenge I have to all of you leaders in your company organizations. What systemic barriers have you eliminated in hiring? Especially for entry-level positions, I see a lot of filtering through resumes. And us purely being human, not with bad intent, we have lots of resumes as a talent acquisition person, and we screen even subconsciously for things like religion, gender, or because often applicants will put their picture on their resume, what they look like. And I believe that for entry-level jobs, we should really just be testing for skills, not for their resume, not what's on their resume, because we all have biases. And so how do you minimize them? When we talk about poverty and how to attract the right talent, one of the things that I often see for people in poverty is it's so hard for them to come to the city to apply for a job, because it means that they have to have money for food, lodging, transportation, and opportunity cost from whatever else job they have or family that they're taking care of. when the fact of the matter is that there's more than a 70% chance that they'll be rejected after the first interview. Think of how much time and money they're risking when there's such high rejection rate in the industry after the first interview. And please don't make people come back the next day for a second interview with a team lead or somebody else, because most likely they slept at a 7-Eleven the previous night. And we advocate just doing an in-person interview for only the final interview. So this way, a lot of work can be done. I'll describe that over automated phone interviews. But what's great about using automation and phone interviews is that it's a very effective tool of removing biases and only judging people on their skill. I'll talk more about that. But over the phone, you don't see their skin color, their haircut, what they dressed in today, or how many earrings they're wearing, or their height, or how dark or light they are. Imagine that the moment they applied online or via an employee referral program, they got a phone call within a couple minutes on their feature phone or smartphone, and they answered the phone. It asked them questions like, press 1 if you're 18, press 2 if you're not, press 1 if you have 2 years of education or college education or not, and now speak how you would handle this customer situation. And all those responses get recorded, and the talent acquisition person listens to it remotely. And then if the person passes, then they can call and invite them after a couple more of those to a final interview. So imagine that happening, and that's happening now with some of our customers, but that is a powerful way of eliminating biases that we just inherently have when we interview somebody in person. Just talk about EngageSpark. The customers in over 125 countries. I won't go into that more. And so our platform helps people, applicants from all different ways, avenues, be it online, Facebook ads, or referrals. I won't go into this too much detail, but just going to one platform so interviews can be automated via Facebook Messenger as well as via automated phone calls. But the key thing here is being the first to interview, because as soon as they submit on JobStreet, within 2-3 minutes they get an automated phone call that starts recording their audio and pre-screening them without biases. Just a side note, I always talk about this because a lot of employers in this country are actually violating the Data Privacy Act when they go and gather names and phone numbers of their employees' friends, because that friend did not give consent to the company for their phone and name to be collected. And as you know, it involves jail time. And so I won't go into too much detail, but if you're interested, we've built a system where it's fully automated, all the tracking's automated, and it's fully Data Privacy Act compliant. And we have a Facebook Messenger bot. But what I'd love for you all to do is actually try this yourself and see how you can eliminate biases by using an automated system, using technology to eliminate our human biases that we all have. So there's one of two ways of doing it. If you can pull out your phone, if you don't mind, and just take 30 seconds. You can either send an SMS to this number, 29290987, and send the word engage. Please go ahead and try it. If you aren't smart, just note that there's some issues going on in the smart network today. So there's a 20-30 minute delay of the response, but it will happen. So please go ahead and try it, or you can go to Facebook or Messenger and search for the word applicant engage, one word, and that'll start up a chatbot. But the key thing here is inclusivity. It doesn't matter what kind of phone you have, be it a feature phone or smartphone. It doesn't matter if you have a data plan or not. And it doesn't matter where in the country you are in order to go through this interview process. This is a demo, but you'll get the idea. And so it's solutions like this that we're building to change how we hire. We have other solutions that our customers use on the employee engagement side, but EngageSpark is a not-for-profit business, so we can build these solutions that improve society and people of all types, so that one day there is no more offense, that there is justice for everyone. Everyone has the same opportunity for jobs. Doesn't matter if they're poor, if they grew up in the province or the city, doesn't matter what phone they have, but everybody should be able to apply and have access, and one day have true justice in our society. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. It's been a pleasure talking to you all.